Fire Punch, which marked a brilliant debut serialization, the masterpiece one-shots Look Back and Goodbye Eri, and currently the second part of Chainsaw Man is being serialized to great acclaim on Shonen Jump Plus, the prodigious talent Tatsuki Fujimoto. When it comes to Fujimoto, his love for movies, frequently mentioned on social media and elsewhere, leaves a strong impression. Among them, he seems to have a particular attachment to Studio Ghibli works, a well-known story among Fujimoto fans. In this interview, to commemorate the publication of The Story of Studio Ghibli, he spoke about Ghibli for the first time in a comprehensive manner, non-stop for an hour. Starting from his personal history of the formative experience of standing in a fully packed movie theater to watch Spirited Away, the interview offers a glimpse into Fujimoto Tatsuki's essence through analyses of Princess Mononoke, his feelings towards director Hayao Miyazaki, and even his own creative techniques, delivered in a substantial 10,000-word volume. Which Studio Ghibli work was Fujimoto-san's original experience with the studio?
The first time I watched one was on TV, but I don't quite remember which work it was. The first time I saw one in a movie theater was Spirited Away. I remember the seats were all filled, and I had to stand to watch it.
In 2001, when Spirited Away was released, it was around the time when multiplex cinemas with fixed seating and seat turnover systems were starting to spread, right?
Spirited Away is the only movie I have ever watched standing, and it left a strong impression on me. Since I was a child, I don't remember exactly what parts moved me, but I do remember feeling I saw something amazing, and it was interesting. Even now, the Studio Ghibli work I rewatch the most is Spirited Away, so I guess it has remained that memorable. By the way, Studio Ghibli has a rich collection of documentary works, and among them, my favorite is the 12-hour piece titled How Ponyo Was Born, the thought process of Hayao Miyazaki. Next is How Princess Mononoke Was Born. I also like Thank You, Mr. Lasseter, about former Pixar member John Lasseter.
It's impressive that even documentaries are ranked. I've also occasionally heard the opinion that Studio Ghibli's documentaries are more interesting than their main anime works.
Well, I think that's from people who view it with a skeptical eye. But there's no doubt that Ghibli's documentaries are also interesting.
You mentioned that your favorite Ghibli work is Princess Mononoke. What aspects of it resonated with you?
When I'm working on manga manuscripts, I always have various movies playing, not just Ghibli's. Honestly, I've watched Princess Mononoke hundreds of times without exaggeration. So to be honest, it's really difficult to talk about specific scenes that stand out in my memory.
So the entire movie became too strongly connected to you, is that right?
Fujimoto Tatsuki's editor. There are actually many creators who play movies they've watched many times while working on their manuscripts. Of course, some play variety shows or news programs, and others listen to music. But among movies, I have the impression that many creators especially play Studio Ghibli works.
When you think about it, the influence that Studio Ghibli works have on Japanese manga artists must be tremendous. Fujimoto-san once operated a Twitter account under his own name, but his ID was @Ashitaka, right? Is Ashitaka from Princess Mononoke really a special character?
I think Ashitaka is the coolest character in all of Ghibli. There are many things I like about him, but despite being cool, he is somewhat indecisive. Or rather, I really like that feeling of him being unsettled. Characters who are well-defined as individuals are cool, but sometimes that makes them less relatable, right? But Ashitaka really wavers between people and the forest.
Ashitaka is caught in the middle between humans, the forest, various factions, and several women, isn't he?
That unsettled nature makes me feel like there's a part of me in him, and at the same time, I can admire him as cool. That balance is my favorite thing about Ashitaka.
You mentioned his coolness, and Ashitaka is definitely one of the coolest action characters in Studio Ghibli's works.
I think everyone likes this scene, but I really love the part where Ashitaka catches an arrow fired by a samurai and shoots it back. It's truly amazing as animation.
That's a famous scene.
That scene, if drawn in manga, would be a relatively small panel.
What?
From the audience's excitement, it feels like it should be a double-page spread. But in manga, you can't really do that. A double-page spread has to be a showcase scene.
Now that I think about it, it's difficult to express that whole sequence as a double-page spread.
Every movie has scenes that wouldn't work as manga, but Ghibli often makes those small panel, detailed scenes the main focus. And, including myself, everyone tends to want to talk about those details.
When people get excited talking about Ghibli works, it often feels like they're discussing very detailed topics.
That's why no matter how many times they're broadcast on TV, people watch them, and I think they get talked about on social media.
Fujimoto-san is also known as a movie enthusiast, but from the perspective of a film fan, what do you think are the characteristics of Ghibli works?
Actually, they are all works with a strong authorial style, but as a result of becoming national works through TV broadcasts, it has become difficult for people to notice that authorial style. For example, if you look at Saze-san from a visual standpoint, the camera is always in a third-person perspective with no unusual compositions, but no one really thinks about that.
Yes, no one does.
From the viewpoint of realism, many Ghibli works don't have much realism in their dialogue. There are also many female speech endings like dawa that no one would say nowadays. Especially in Hayao Miyazaki's works, all the characters tend to have a Miyazaki-like personality. For example, after a character says something funny, the woman who responds might say, "Eh? Oh? Ha ha ha," repeating and scrutinizing what was said before laughing.
Just taken it for granted somehow. But now that you mention it, these characters have quite distinctive ways of responding.
Including myself, many people have become unsure about the authorship in Ghibli's works. And even if we try to talk about the grammar or dramaturgy of the works now, it's pretty difficult. And I think that's what makes it interesting.
While the authorship embedded in the expression, as Fujimoto-san pointed out, tends to be overlooked, I think when discussing Ghibli works, the relationship among director Hayao Miyazaki, director Isao Takahata, producer Toshio Suzuki, and their close associates is inseparable. What do you think?
That's right. Especially through the filter of Miyazaki's works, there seems to be an awareness of Takahata flowing through every piece. But on the other hand, I also feel that such a way of viewing Ghibli works might be a bit unsophisticated. The perspective we use there feels like nothing more than the impression we've received through books written by Toshio Suzuki and documentary works.
Indeed, whether it's biographical books or documentary films, since they are shot and edited from someone's perspective, they can be considered a form of creation.
I myself tend to watch Ghibli works from that story of Miyazaki, Takahata, and Toshio Suzuki perspective, and there is enjoyment in that, but I try to watch them without thinking too much as possible.
That's the viewpoint of what is depicted within the work is everything, right?
Exactly. Especially with Ghibli, I want to watch the works from that kind of perspective as much as possible.
When you say especially with Ghibli, is it because there is more surrounding information compared to other works?
Yes, for a movie like American Sniper, I think it's more enjoyable to watch it considering the social conditions in America at the time of production, but with Ghibli, it feels somewhat different. In fact, it's interesting just to watch the work simply without thinking about those things.
I would definitely like to hear your perspective as a manga artist on Studio Ghibli. One of Ghibli's characteristics, I think, is their commitment to storyboards.
Yes, Ghibli's storyboards are truly amazing. They're so well done as drawings that you might think they were redrawn later for publication.
In the story of Studio Ghibli, there are many mentions of storyboards, but what's especially striking is that in Hayao Miyazaki's works, the staff often begin animation before Miyazaki-san has completed the storyboards. Watching the documentaries, there are even moments when the staff's animation catches up, and they seem to be waiting for the director's storyboards.
That definitely happens. Eiichiro Oda, the creator of One Piece, said that director Miyazaki progresses his storyboards like a manga serialization, and I truly agree with that.
I feel that for Miyazaki-san, the pressure is less about deadlines and schedules and more about the pressure to create work. He works with a number of animators far exceeding the assistance of a manga artist, so I imagine the weight of that responsibility must be tremendous.
Even though director Hayao Miyazaki, who creates storyboards like weekly manga serialization, is a special case, I feel that the production process of Studio Ghibli works, where the director himself draws like the original manga and the producer reads it, bears a resemblance to the relationship between a manga artist and an editor. Mr. Fujimoto, how do you perceive them as manga artists?
I really sense that in the relationship between director Goro Miyazaki, Hayao's son, and producer Toshio Suzuki. However, I feel that for Hayao Miyazaki, the manga editor was more likely Mr. Isao Takahata. Looking not only within Ghibli, but across the entire anime industry, I think Takahata was the only person more cultured than Miyazaki.
What exactly is that tremendous level of culture shared by Takahata and Miyazaki? When you look across all fields, it makes you wonder if there are or will be any other creators at that level.
They are truly in a class of their own. Regarding creators' culture, there's talk like a generation that only watches anime and makes anime, a sort of otaku theory. But I don't think Takahata and Miyazaki fit into that category at all. Because if you consider whether all animators of that era were that intelligent, the answer is definitely no. By chance, there was a person named Isao Takahata who had an incredible level of culture. Miyazaki met him and by chance had the opportunity to follow him. That is a miracle.
Exactly.
For example, director Miyazaki knows about many countries, so he can create fantasy worlds set in specific countries or combinations of them. But for people like us, otakus in their 30s to 40s now, if told to depict fantasy, we end up creating a world like that of the game Final Fantasy. I think the reason director Makoto Shinkai continues to create works set in Japan is that he considers storytelling set in Japan as the area where he can best compete, and that's fine. Worlds like those in games are not wrong either. However, from a cultural perspective, I do think that people who can create works like Hayao Miyazaki will probably disappear in the future. Of course, if you do research, you can still make such works, but from my experience, I feel that people who can afford research trips with that kind of money will no longer exist.
Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind was adapted into a film based on the manga series serialized by director Miyazaki himself. What are your thoughts on that?
Since manga can be controlled by one person, it tends to express the author's individuality more than live action or anime. The manga version of Nausicaa can also be enjoyed from that perspective. I really think Miyazaki is a top-notch manga artist as well. His composition skills are amazing. Even though the panels are detailed and numerous, they are easy to follow, and his storytelling is truly excellent. Also, the lines are impressive. I actually want to add more lines and shading in my own manga, but with a weekly serialization, it's just impossible. So the detailed line work in the manga version of Nausicaa, which is serialized monthly, is enviable.
Moreover, anime, where Nausicaa was serialized, is not a manga magazine, but an anime information magazine, so it probably didn't have the usual demands of serialized manga, like needing to be a hit to sell the magazine, or having cliffhangers every time to keep readers hooked. In that sense, it can be said to be a very privileged manga.
It's like a bande dessinée, which is great. Every manga artist definitely wants to draw a complete volume without compromise.
If we talk about Fujimoto-san's works, the long one-shot manga Look Back, which was released after the end of Part 1 of Chainsaw Man, is exactly that kind of work, right?
That's right. When I drew Look Back, thanks to the success of Chainsaw Man, I was in a position to pay my assistants for a long period, and there were people willing to follow me, so I could do it. But for a new manga artist to spend as much time as they want on one volume is absolutely financially impossible. As for publishers who accept that, I wonder how that is.
I think today's publishers can afford to wait for manga artists in terms of time. But the problem is that the manga artists run out of money first, including living expenses and various other costs.
That's exactly it. Still, it's interesting that creating a work without compromise isn't necessarily the best.
That's true.
From that perspective, I really think Studio Ghibli is a very unique studio. The balance they strike between commercial success and artistry, for example, the episode about how director Takahata used money in anime production, that amount was incredible.
After the hit of Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, Miyazaki-san started making films using the money he earned as funding. But the budget was exceeded, and Miyazaki-san almost had to put his house up as collateral. There are some incredible stories like that. Moreover, the film made at that time was The Story of Yanagawa's Canals, a live-action documentary about rivers in Fukuoka Prefecture.
Right. I'm quite fond of documentary films, but even so, that movie was quite difficult to watch. It truly felt like a record documentary.
It has almost no entertainment value. Even when it was released on home media, it was part of a series called the Ghibli Academic Library.
But looking at it from another angle, one of Miyazaki Hayao's greatness is that he balances commercial appeal with artistic integrity. Usually, you can't achieve that level of balance. Moreover, it doesn't even match his public image. It's truly remarkable.
What do you mean by doesn't match his public image?
Miyazaki is generally seen as a rigid person who never bends his core principles. But his works are incredibly empathetic to the audience. While staying close to the audience, the director's own message still comes through clearly. That's something ordinary people just can't do.
Maybe it's a miraculous sense of balance he gained by watching Isao Takahata's example.
I think Takahata-san is truly a huge presence for Miyazaki-san. Everything about him is top-notch. So I think the new work, The Boy and the Heron, will be a Miyazaki film dedicated to Isao Takahata. Without such motivation, Miyazaki-san probably wouldn't have the desire to make a feature film again and might have been content with short films. Including that aspect, I'm really looking forward to Miyazaki-san's new work.
The Boy and the Heron is another new work that comes with Miyazaki director's repeated withdrawals from retirement. Fujimoto-san, do you think true retirement exists for creators?
I'm not quite sure. But Aka Akasaka, the original author of Oshinoko, declared that he won't draw anymore himself, right? I thought, I'm jealous. I want to do that too.
I thought that statement showed his determination to go with only the original work, and it was really cool.
Even if he ends up drawing again later, I'd be happy.
So, Fujimoto-san, does that mean you also want to focus on storytelling?
Yes, I definitely think that would be more enjoyable.
On the other hand, do you ever want to try just drawing in manga?
No. Of course, there's the fun of balancing story and art, and also the fun of just creating stories. But if it were manga with only art, in my case, I think it would become a narrow world when delivering it to everyone.
Finally, I would like to return to the topic of Princess Mononoke and Spirited Away. I think these two films are the most epic-making works in director Hayao Miyazaki's filmography in terms of the change in storytelling compared to previous Ghibli works. What do you think?
Yes. All the works up until then were really neatly put together as stories, like Castle in the Sky. But I think Princess Mononoke and Spirited Away have created a different kind of charm.
In the book, The Story of Studio Ghibli, it is written that from around the time of Princess Mononoke, director Miyazaki began to tackle the theme of unsolvable problems.
That's really true. When I think about how to conclude the story of Princess Mononoke myself, it's very difficult. In fact, there are many works that imitate Princess Mononoke, but they all end with an unrealistic resolution like nature and humans joined hands, which makes it feel fake. When you think about making it into a work, that's the usual way to wrap it up.
If you look at it positively, it was an ending that entrusted ideals to the future, like placing a wish on the future.
But in Princess Mononoke, the forest and humans still hate each other, and Ashitaka was able to understand San as an individual, but not the forest. And it also ends in a way that makes you feel that forest will gradually disappear.
Yes.
So if you think about whether it is cohesive as a work in general, Princess Mononoke is not. But despite that, it makes you feel like you saw something good. I think that is really amazing. Even I, when I was a child, watched Princess Mononoke without thinking about any of that and simply felt that was great.
From a child's perspective, it can also be seen as a story where the forest was saved.
The same goes for Spirited Away.
Chihiro, a weak girl, leaves her parents, meets various people in a different world, works, and clearly grows as a person in the latter half. At first, she was cautiously going down a very tall staircase, but in the latter half, she went down easily. Her effort to save Haku is also a great growth compared to the initial Chihiro.
She becomes almost like a completely different, stronger person, doesn't she?
Watching her, we also think, wow, so many things have happened, seeing how much Chihiro has grown. But when Chihiro returns to the real world at the end, she gets scared of the darkness in the tunnel again and clings to her parents. At that moment, I thought, and felt really sad, wondering, is Chihiro going to forget everything that happened in this movie?
Yeah.
But surely that's not the case. Yubaba said, "You never forget something that once happened. You just can't remember it." And that's truly how it is.
That's one of the best quotes.
I think that's a story about quirk, like quirks of the hands, breathing, walking, or riding a bicycle. People don't really remember how they first learned those things, right?
To put it broadly, it's about how you live.
Exactly. I think that kind of awareness is always present in Hayao Miyazaki's works. Even the importance of work that he spoke of as a main theme in Spirited Away is ultimately just a certain trigger, and I feel the essence lies there. Because as soon as Chihiro returns, she probably forgets how she did all that work as well.
I think so too.
Not only that, she goes back to being the timid Chihiro again. But as symbolized by the hairpin, what happened in that other world hasn't disappeared. I think that feeling is something you don't find in other movies. In other films, the ending would be like, the bullied kid goes to another world and comes back able to stand up to the bullies.
That's the usual pattern. Growth gained from adventures in another world changes the real world.
That kind of ending makes for a neat story. But if you do that, I think it becomes a lie.
Various questions arise about the movie, right? Like, can she live a normal life in the real world while keeping her memories of the other world a secret? Or, during her adventures in the other world, didn't the bullies also gain some kind of experience in the real world? And so on.
I think most people who watched Spirited Away thought Chihiro doesn't have to return to the real world. Because she's more lively in the other world, she cultivates her virtues as a person, and she earns the respect of those around her. But the gods and other irrational or incomprehensible beings appearing in that other world are depicted in the story, and that feeling comes across to us. So, as Chihiro and as a story, we can understand why it's ultimately better for her to return to her own world, and that leads to the sense of loss at the end of the story.
Moreover, after that, Chihiro goes to a new school as a transfer student.
Right. If you think about it more, there's a scene where fallen leaves and dust have accumulated on her father's car. So it's possible that several years have passed in the real world by the time she returns. So if you think about it realistically, it's quite a harsh development.
In the real world, there might have been a commotion about the family of 3 being spirited away.
But for those of us who watch the movie until the end, we can still think, it'll be okay, Chihiro will be fine after this.
Exactly. It's the you never forget something that once happened from the story.
Somehow, Spirited Away is truly amazing.
That feels like it's also a story about watching movies itself. Your experience of having the feeling of standing and watching Spirited Away in the theater as a child, but not remembering the details, and your state of being too deeply involved to analyze it, and everyone's failure to notice the distinctive style of Studio Ghibli. All of these, in a way, are the same as Chihiro.
Yes, I think that's exactly right.
You haven't forgotten that you watched it.
I just can't recall it. That's a really good phrase.